I call the meeting of the Measure G Oversight Committee to order. Lauren, could we have a roll call, please?
Committee Member Sabano? Committee Member Lyman? Committee Member Oak?
Yes.
Thank you.
Measure G Citizen Oversight Committee background. No action is needed on this. Our first item is item 2, Measure G Citizens Oversight Committee background. Did I get a staff report?
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. So I'll keep it fairly brief because I think we all know why we're here tonight. So the Measure G is a Katati Essential Services measure. It was approved by voters in June of 2014. Key pieces of this ballot measure were a requirement for annual audits and independent citizens' oversight of the revenue and expenses. So following the passage of Measure G, the City Council adopted Resolution 2015-64, which established this committee to perform those functions I just mentioned. And I will just point out a couple things about this. One of the requirements of Measure G is that the Oversight Committee review the report within 2 months of the City Council receiving the audited financial statements from the year that we're talking about, which is fiscal year 18-19. So the City Council accepted the financial reports for fiscal year 18-19 a couple days ago on June 14th. So we're well within that 2-month time period. This body is subject to the Brown Act, which is just basically a state law for open meetings, and included in the packet is a guideline from the League of California Cities about the Brown Act, which I won't get into unless you have questions about it, but it basically is intended to ensure that meetings are open and transparent, that there's not discussions before the meeting among the members, and that decisions are made in public. And then in general, just on the high points, the duties of this committee, as outlined in the City Council resolution that I mentioned previously, 2015-64, is to be an advisory body to the City Council, to provide oversight of the revenues and expenses pertaining to the Measure G sales tax revenue generated from the prior fiscal year, so fiscal year 18-19 in this case, and provide the Council with an annual written report as approved by the majority of the committee members. And lastly, providing input to city staff on community education on fiscal issues and outreach pursuant to Measure G. So as an example, in prior years, when we were going over the Measure G report, some of the, one thing off the top of my head that stands out is some of the projects, we all might know them because we sort of live them every day, but in this in this forum where people that aren't that familiar with specific projects or specific initiatives may not know where in the city they took place. We like to call subdivisions by their original subdivision names that nobody would ever know because there's not a sign out there, there's not a street name that ever says that, but just like to keep it confusing for everybody. So you notice that's just one thing as an example that you see now in all the Measure G reports. Not only do we list the projects, but we show on a map in the report itself where those projects were. So everyone knows what we're talking about. And it's not just us. Yeah. And, ultimately these are intended to be public documents and, used by not only us in this room, but, anyone in the community that wants to know what the sales tax went for in the prior year. So with that, just a high-level overview of the committee and the committee's duties. I'd be happy to answer any questions about that. Yeah. All right.
Change this in some way. We have a rotation right now. Chair, do we want to keep that, or do we want to come up with another way of doing this? Just fine? Okay. Yeah,
Yeah, it's fine, yeah. Right now, the chair just follows the mayor, whoever the council person was that appointed the committee member. If they're mayor, then that's the chair here. Yeah. Good.
did you already give a staff report? I think this is, or is that the next item?
Well, you stole my thunder. That's pretty much it. Yeah. Yeah. That's pretty much it. So if that is the desire of the committee, then committee member Lyman would then be the chair, and committee member Riley would be the vice chair, who isn't here tonight, but that isn't really that important. You can still be a vice chair. That's usually what happens to me if I don't go to meetings. I usually get nominated for things. So. But that would be the rotation, if you guys choose to do that.
Committee members have any questions or discussion for this item? Okay. And public comment? I don't see any. Okay. Any further questions of the staff? Discussion needed? Okay. Let's see. And I believe that you're going to take over.
Move this little sign.
Yes.
There you go. Our next item is
All right, thank you, Chair, committee members. So, again, this is it was actually a great suggestion. It was input on a prior year that it's easier to understand when we actually get to the Measure G report, the next item after this. It's easier to understand that if you understand the context that led up to the budget and the expenditures for that fiscal year. So every year, staff and council in public meetings sit down and go through strategic planning sessions for the upcoming fiscal year, and that's sort of a precursor to developing the budget for that coming fiscal year. So for fiscal year 18-19, we have a summary of the council's goals and objectives, as well as some of the strategic planning focus. So I'll start with it's on page 75 of the packet. I'll start with the 2018-2019 goals and objectives. So at a high level, there was 4 goals. There's many objectives under each goal, but sort of generally speaking, goal 1 is ensuring the long-term vitality of the city. And the focus of this really is fiscal sustainability to provide the services and infrastructure that the community wants. I can kind of boil all that down into, that's generally the intent of that goal. The second goal is to provide core services consistent with standard community service levels. And here, where this can kind of be distilled down to focusing on improved core services that cities should provide. So things like safety, infrastructure, those types of things, making sure that we do the best job we can in those sort of core areas that cities really should focus on. Because that's our goal. So whenever issues come up through the year, like they always do, that's sort of the compass, for deciding what are priorities and what are not, is making sure that we focus on the core stuff first, and then to the extent that we have capacity, we do other things. Goal 3, pursue opportunities to increase efficiencies of city operations. And so this is just a perpetual thing. We're always looking for more efficient ways to deliver the same or better services, or do things in a better way, provide services more conveniently to people. That's something that's a theme that you'll hear more about, but more like online services, just being more available for people in the ways that they want to receive the services, because people's, not everyone works in the same way that people traditionally worked. So their hours are different, and it's not always easy to come down during business hours. And so we're always looking for different ways to do things. And then finally, goal 4, community engagement. So it's really focusing on keeping regular communication with the community so that A, they're aware of what the city's doing, so they just know what's going on. And then B, for us, just making sure that, we engage regularly with people, and, so that we know what their concerns are, what their issues are, and then we can sort of build that into our thinking as we're responding to things or developing new budgets or new fiscal, strategic planning goals for the following year. So that's the high level. And then in talking with the council, really they kind of sort of further encapsulated that to be, economic development, customer service, and outreach and communication being some of the key goals. Now I'm on packet page 76 for following along. And this is at a high level broken down by departments. And in a lot of ways, the departments overlap each other, so they work jointly on some of these things. But to the extent that the project was led by a certain department, it falls into that departmental category. So and I'm not going to read all these, but feel free to ask questions about any of them. But I'll just give you some highlights. And we'll get into it more, too, with the report. So for the city manager and recreation, public outreach was continuing to be a high priority. So, for example, like we just turned on a cable channel recently where you have new social media platforms we're always working on. We just recently started YouTube, and so we're always looking for new ways, just like people want to interact with the city in different ways, they also have different ways of receiving information. Some people like to read the thing that comes in the newsletter that comes in the utility bill. They think that's the kind of feels easiest for them to take information in that way. Other people, especially younger people, like to look at social media, and they don't want to look at printed things that much. So it's really trying to make sure that everyone is in the loop on what's going on. So if they want to know, the information is available to them. So we're always looking for new ways to do that. Financial reporting improvements, so that's just more of an internal thing initially, but that's going to continue to evolve into external stuff, which Angela will talk a little bit more about. We redid our citywide filing system, and that's electronic filing. We used to mostly have paper filing. We moved to a almost entirely electronic filing system, so the initial stage of that, which we're still finishing up right now, is really making sure that all of our new workflows and new processes are in this electronic system, and then eventually the plan is to be able to stand it up externally so that if someone wants to look for records, like someone from the public, they can look up contracts or look up whatever they want. And then finally, I think the last thing in this sort of department that is worth talking about is the Veranda Flitty Ranch startup. So that we have a nonprofit there that's now running the farm, and so just starting that, and that's continuing to build momentum, but it started in this fiscal year. For administrative services, I'll just say that every organization, every city is required to do an annual audit at the end of the year. So when you close the year out, a third-party independent auditor reviews all the financial statements and make sure both that everything is properly accounted for, but also that there's business controls in place to make sure that that there's no risk of financial mismanagement, that kind of thing, right? So historically, we've done the basic financial audit. More recently, if you look under administrative services, this thing called a CAFR. It's a comprehensive annual financial report. That's a basic financial statement, and then it's wrapped around that is a whole bunch of other information about the city. So if you want to know anything about anything to do with the finances of the city, it's all in the CAFR. And it's the gold standard in terms of financial reporting. And there should be a copy up there for everyone. If you have trouble sleeping one night and you want to look through that thing, there's a lot there, but it's from a financial reporting standpoint, it was important for us to get to that just for transparency, it's all there. If anyone ever wants to know, that's what's going on. So the PAFR, right next to it on that same bullet, is called a Popular Annual Financial Report. And that is, basically it's the report to the community. It's a small one. It's the other one that you see there. So this is really taking all the salient high points of this. Like if you had a little elevator speech and you wanted to kind of know like what really matters, what's relevant, what's the most relevant things from this large document, that's all here in the PAFR. And so we do that too because even though the CAFR is very complete, there's still a lot of accounting jargon in it. And so this is an attempt to really try to distill it down to the most relevant things, but also try to describe it in more plain English so that it's more accessible to people that aren't accountants and just may want to casually look at what's going on financially with the city. And then the other things I'll just touch on with admin services, and they are kind of blending into the next fiscal year, but moving into utility paperless billing and business licenses, renewals online, and other services online. So that was part of the focus in this fiscal year. Under community development, they finished the wayfinding program design. So this spring, you'll start to see some of the directional signage going out, actually being installed. So it's a long time coming, but it's going to be nice to have it out there. We started our economic development. This is completion of the ED strategy. That's economic development strategy. That's what that acronym means. We started it in this fiscal year, but we're continuing it now. And so, actually, in the next in February, we're going to start to have workshops here about different, code changes, process changes that we can do to protect, to really preserve and protect what's important about Cotati and what people love about Cotati, but allow more flexibility for businesses and other things to hopefully enhance some of the economic opportunities for both existing businesses, but also new development that wants to come in. And then ADU is accessory dwelling unit. It's like granny units. So there's been a lot of state law changes around that. There's a housing crisis in the state, as you've probably heard. So one of the many kind of never-ending landslide of legislation coming from Sacramento regarding housing, a lot of it has to do with accessory dwelling units. So we're updating our codes to align it with the state and also have discussions about those areas where we still have discretion over what that looks like, how it's built. And then, of course, there was quite a few development projects that were happening that took up their time, and then other support stuff, which feel free to ask me any questions about that. It's kind of a long list on this. And then Public Works, so the big projects there are the P1 sewer, the aptly named P1 sewer. So that's the sewer line that went under Highway 116 and down Redwood Drive in front of Lowe's. That was a key piece of infrastructure for our downtown area, but also to deal with some existing capacity issues. Right now we have prior to this project, we had just a single sewer line coming down, essentially the Laguna to Santa Rosa. And so there's only one sewer line that served that whole part of town, and it crossed under the freeway there. So it was a risk both in terms of it was the only crossing point for our wastewater, which goes to this treatment on the west side out in the Laguna area. But also during wet weathers, during storms, it would become pretty full because you get rainwater infiltration and some inflow. And so it was already surcharging in its existing condition. So this pipeline does both. It relieves that surcharging, so it doesn't, you don't have wastewater backing up, essentially filling the manholes up. And if it gets really bad, it actually would come out. I mean, it never happened to us, but that's why we did this project, to get ahead of that. Because if you don't deal with problems like this, then it can gradually get worse, or you get a blockage or something, and then it just pops out of that manhole. And we try to keep the sewage in the pipes. It's kind of the general philosophy there. So it did that, and it also just allows for sort of the general plan development of our downtown. And then also just a lot of paving work. So the 2018-19 paving restoration project, that was a lot of new paving in the L section of Cotati, behind the Olivers. You saw more this year, but from this particular year was mostly behind Olivers that paving happened. And then East Cotati Avenue, that's in front of Sunflower Park. The design was done during this fiscal year. Obviously, it was paved just recently, but the design was completed here. And then on the police side of things, updating our emergency operations plan, and then just a lot of new community outreach. Besides the National Night Out and the Coffee with a Cop, and also the Parent Project they were doing for at-risk youth. We also have been doing like HOA visits and just talking to them about, what's going on at the city. These patrol beats, they're really, they're beats in the sense, they're not beats in the sense that an officer is full-time in a certain part of the city, but they're beats in the sense that an officer has sort of a lead responsibility for certain areas so that they get knowledgeable about the issues in certain parts of town, and then they have community meetings with people in those areas. Just to make sure that if people have concerns, they know kind of who the lead person is for their area, and they can hopefully address issues that way. And so I think that's sort of the high points, and we'll get into some more detail when we get into the report here in a minute, but that was really what the council was thinking about going into the budgeting process before we started the fiscal year. And so those are where the priorities were at the start of the year. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, committee members. So this is our annual report on our Measure G, as included in your packet. So I'm going to briefly go over, so again, this is for the fiscal year 18-19. So I know we're in 2020, and so we're going back, but we're subject to the audit, so we're looking back. So a summary of what we're going to go over is really what's a summary of what is Measure G, a summary of what the funds were that were received, what essential city programs were provided by Measure G funding, and then a summary of the audited financial report as included in the CAFR and in the Measure G report. So the purpose of Measure G, as we went over briefly before, is that it's to provide the funding essentials for city services. It was a 1% sales tax voted by our citizens. It was approved on June 2014 and enacted in October 1st, 2014. It replaced, which was previously called Measure A, which expired in 2015. And it's going to continue until 2023 unless it is renewed again by the voters. So just because this sales tax is important and vital to the city, just want to provide a brief breakdown of how the city sales tax is for the city. So we do have a total of 9.25% sales tax in the city, Measure G making up 1% of it, and then 7.25 is a statewide sales and use tax, which does include the 1% local Bradley Burns tax, which the city also receives. So 2% of that 9 goes to the city, and 1% of that, thankfully, is the Measure G, and the remainder goes to all these other, to the state, the county transportation, and all the other county add-on taxes, which include SMART, Open Space, SCTA, Library, and Parks Measure Act. So here's a summary of the total Measure G funds received to date. So total receipts are the $2.6 million for the fiscal year 18-19. The state administration fees, of course, when they receive the sales tax, they take their administration fees before they remit it back to the city, but it really does make up less than 1.01% of the sales tax that we receive. So approximately every quarter we receive $640,000 revenues due to this sales tax, which go directly to these vital services. And of the sales tax, the primary contributors to that sales tax are from the food and drugs and restaurant industry. So here's a breakdown of the Measure G funds and how they're used for the last 5 years. So you can see we try to keep everything pretty consistent between what's used for operations and maintenance and what is used for improvement projects and equipment. So for the current year of 18-19, approximately 17% was used for the improvement projects and equipment, and the remainder was used for continuing operations and maintenance improvements for essential services. That's further broken down for the total uses. So we see them in those two pieces where it's capital versus operations, but we also have the different programs that are used for, which includes the public safety, streets, sidewalks, and storm drains, the landscape, public building programs, and the recreation program.
I was just going to point out one thing here that you can see on the far right, there's the gold part of the bar, which is the recreation programming. So before Measure G, there was not a recreation program at the city because it had gone away with the recession. So that's one of the things that was brought back. In addition to the public safety and the streets, which constitute the majority of the expenditures, recreation was a high priority for the community and therefore the council. So you can see that program continues to grow.
That's a great point, because this Measure G does fully fund the recreation, and that's what was able to bring back the programs that we have. So for public safety, the total Measure G spend for public safety was $784,420. They're all rounded. So the city continued to fund ongoing operations to preserve our local police department, which includes the investments in traffic safety, which is a 3-way stop that was installed at La Plaza and East Sierra, as well as the purchase of a replacement vehicle for a vehicle replacement fund. And there's also the traffic bypass. Oh, no, that was the 3-way stop installation was there at La Plaza and East Sierra.
Yeah, it funds police department operations as well as these items here. So the patrol vehicle and the 3-way stop was a safety measure to. I think you guys all know where that intersection is, right behind the fire station, where people would cut through, and there's.
So in a cross-section with that, the streets improvement, so that we have the public safety, the streets improvement with a 3-way stop, but we actually have streets improvements, which was a total of $834,890 for the fiscal year. So those improvements really came from a strategic plan, which was the L section street paving, which we just talked about, which the total investment in that was approximately $1.5 million through 18-19. The Measure G really contributed to that. The design, which was the L section that was completed the construction, as well as the design for the next year that completed the rest of the project, as well as the design and pre-construction of that East Cali Avenue paving projects, which included the sidewalks here in front of Sunflower Park. And that was we were able to, with Measure G funds, leverage $675,000 worth of grants to help pay for that project, so the paving and the sidewalk improvements. It also continued up to the top, the ongoing operations, including a civil engineer and the enhanced traffic signal and street light landscape maintenance, which is done through Public Works and other consultants. Continuing on this streets, sidewalk, and storm drains, we were able to get the 5-year capital improvement plan drafted, and we're getting that all wrapped up and hopefully going to council. But we did significant work on it during the year so that we have a plan going forward for continuing maintenance of our capital infrastructure, as well as we designed the school street pathway on Richardson's, which is also going to be a grant project where we can have some grant matching funds due to the ability to use and leverage Measure G, and implement the study on trash impacts to our stormwater system project as well.
I will just add, it's just kind of a funny side note. So the trash impacts, it's a new stormwater permit that cities have to get, and trash is one of one of the things that we have to study. So there's something called total maximum daily load, TMDLs, and there's a TMDL for trash, right? So the total maximum daily load of trash that you can discharge into creeks, essentially, right, into your storm drain system. And it's kind of a new thing up here, you know. When they first started implementing these stricter stormwater regulations, the trash thing was mostly a LA problem, like Los Angeles problem. So the LA River, if you know, it's basically just a large concrete culvert. It's not really much of a river anymore. And they used to have a shopping cart problem, you know. So they developed like a shopping cart loading, you know, like how many shopping carts you can have in your rivers before it becomes a pollution problem. So anyway, Public Works, you know, works on this, and it's a permit requirement, and you know, we try to take it. I mean, we do take it seriously, but the backstory is pretty, at least for me, is pretty funny. At least I think it's funny. I don't know. No, we don't. Thank goodness.
Thankfully, we don't have that trash impact. So that's our street sidewalks contributions from Measure G. Our park and landscape for fiscal year 18-19 was a total amount of expenditures of $438,921. This funded, of course, ongoing operations to keep our parks clean, the restrooms tidy, and make sure that everything's maintained, which was the cost of a full-time maintenance worker. We completed construction on the citywide lighting project, which was fantastic. It's great driving down across the park and not wondering what's in there, who's in there. You can see all the way through it and feel safe and secure. But that continued on past La Plaza and included other, the crossways at McGinnis Pathway as well. So it's nice being able to walk around those areas and have it well lit. We continued public workshops and doing the public parks master plan, which is going to be incorporated into that 5-year capital improvement project plan, as well as removed 2 diseased and unsafe pine trees that were at Sunflower Park. So there are some significantly large trees there at Sunflower Park that were diseased and needed to get removed, and we leveraged Measure G to get that done. The other part of our projects is the public building program, which for fiscal year 18-19 totaled $230,355, which has funded the ongoing building operation costs for the buildings we have across the city. We continue to fund an inspection services and code enforcement code enforcement, funded maintenance and repairs of our buildings and equipment, and replaced a non-functioning HVAC system for a large part of City Hall. So it's nice being warm in here tonight, having a functioning HVAC, all because of Measure G. And last, of course, but not least, the recreation, which everyone loves. But for fiscal year, Measure G was able to bring us this recreation program for $256,079, which funds a full-time recreation manager, a recreation and facilities coordinator, as well as all of their seasonal staff that come on to run the projects and programs and summer camps and farm stirs, and the list goes on and on and on. Is included in the report. Their section of what they do, you know, with these funds is fantastic. They redesigned an activity guide for both the spring, summer, and fall, winter programs that are here in Cotati, because now that we have so many programs, it's great to have an activity guide to brag about in the community. And they continue to fund services for all the supplies and all the support that was needed to grow these programs and events around the city. So that gets down to, okay, this is what was spent. This is what Measure G, this is the money that came in. 100% of it was spent on all these great programs for the city. And this was then, we accumulate all these expenses and we put them in a nice report and show them to our auditors, and he gets to judge whether this is materially correct. Is this really where the funds went? And that's where we get to our audited financial statements, which were issued to council just on Tuesday. They received them, got the auditor's report, management rep letter saying that there was, everything was financially sound. Basically no material misstatements, no adverse opinions between the auditor and management. So it was a very clean opinion. We were great to have Terry Creek as our auditor to be able to work with us, and he's been doing Measure G since it started, so he understands what it is and what it's about and its vitality to the city. And he is an independent third-party auditor. It's important to note. He is not in any way associated with the city. He's independent. And so included within this packet is the audited financial statements that are included in the CAFR as well as in the Measure G report. And this just identifies the same way the total operations and maintenance by those different programs as we summarized, and the capital improvement and equipment expenses that are for those same programs. So it organizes in a little bit different fashion, but it's a little bit more detailed so you can really see what programs and what function they were used. And again, the state administration fees, really a minimal amount, but it's included to make sure. And so that's the Measure G report in summary. If you have any questions, I'm glad to answer them.
So now we look at the sample letter. Is that the next order of business? And sample letter is right here. I can read it quickly. So the sample, oh, you have the sample letter? You have the sample letter. You have the sample letter? Okay. So have we all read it? Okay, and any questions about it? Okay.
Yeah.
And can I have a motion to approve the sample letter? Okay, thank you both very much. And vote then to send the letter to the city council. All those in favor? Aye. Okay. No other business? Is that where we are?
That's where you are, yeah.
Okay, meeting is now adjourned.
All right. Thank you very much.
That's pretty speedy. Oh, I have to, there you go.
Yeah.